Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for Week 1. As always, these ranks are intended for half PPR leagues, and for the most part, we kind of know some of the preseason injuries, but I will remind you who's unavailable. Rashee Rice and Jordan Addison are both suspended. Chris Godwin and Brandon Ayuk are both going to be out on the PUP list, basically. And then Jalen Coker and Jalen McMillan are also on IR. Demarcus Robinson of the 49ers has also been suspended. But let's get into it. At number 1, it's very obvious. We're obviously ranking Ja'Marr Chase at the Browns at number 1. You know exactly why he was drafted number 1. You're never benching him. You took him 101 overall. It's pretty obvious. You have to start him. And last year, in 2 games versus the Browns, he did average 17.3 points per game. Fire him up. No concerns whatsoever. At number 2, I'm ranking Nico Collins at the Rams. My only hesitation with Nico this year was the fact that he was injury prone. He has missed 17 games in his 4-year career, but obviously Week 1, he's fully healthy. And here's a reminder of what he was doing last year to start the year before getting injured in Week 5. His first 4 games of 2024, he averaged 10.8 targets per game, 7.5 catches per game, 122 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. That's an average of 18.9 points per game. So although the Rams are a good team, their deficiency in the defense is definitely the secondary. They don't have a corner that is going to shut him down. Nico should be great. So fire him up with confidence. He's my number 2 receiver in Week 1. At number 3, I believe Drake London is going to have an excellent game at home versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One reason why I believe the Falcons will be winning this game is because Tampa has always struggled to contain Drake London throughout his career, especially when he's playing in Atlanta. London's numbers versus the Bucs are insane. An average of 10.7 targets, 9.3 catches, 149 yards per game, and 1 touchdown in his last 3 home games versus Tampa Bay. That's an average of 21.6 points per game. And with only 1 touchdown in that 3-game sample size, he's not touchdown dependent at all. So the ceiling is literally wide receiver 1 overall this week. I love Drake London in this matchup. He's going off. Mark it down. London is top 3 in Week 1. At number 4, I think A.J. Brown versus Dallas is a must start. Last year, the Eagles beat the Cowboys 34-6 and then 41-7. Now, both games were against a backup quarterback, but the Dallas defense did not improve since last year at all. So even if Dak's Cowboys put up more points this time, they're not containing the Eagles. They're dropping at least 30, if not 40 plus on Dallas this week. So Trayvon Diggs is expected to play on Thursday, but he barely practiced the last few weeks. And he's also kind of an all-or-nothing corner. While he does catch some interceptions, he also gives up a lot of big plays as well. So A.J. Brown should dominate. I think he's a top 5 play this week. At number 5, I believe Malik Nabers at Washington is going off. Nabers played very well against the Commanders last year. In 2 games versus Washington, he averaged 14.5 targets, 9.5 catches, 93 yards per game, and did score 1 touchdown. That's an average of 17.1 points per game in half PPR. So if you play in full PPR, the volume was always the big selling point on Nabers. He's going to be a very high floor play, locked into the top 10 every week. And against Washington, I do have him top 5 this week. The questionable tag has to do with his back injury, but according to him, that's a very minor concern, not a problem. And then there's also a toe and shoulder situation going on, but I'm not going to panic. I'm not worried about it. Nabers should be fine. He's a very young guy, and I don't think injuries are going to be a problem for him this season. So fire him up. Definitely trust him. While the Commanders do have a healthy Marshawn Lattimore, and in the past that has been somewhat relevant in terms of lockdown matchups, I'm not going to panic. Definitely trust Nabers with Russell Wilson throwing him the ball. Nabers is top 5. At number 6, I believe Brian Thomas Jr. versus Carolina is a must start. I think his upside is potentially the number 1 guy this week, and he's going to be lighting up every single matchup all throughout the year. He's basically unguardable. He has elite speed, elite separation ability, and down the field, he always breaks one for a big play. So I trust him as a guaranteed top 10 receiver all year. And the Panthers' top cornerback, J.C. Horn, is currently questionable, but even if he plays, no one can stop Brian Thomas Jr. So you can maybe try to slow him down, but inevitably he will get past you. He will have a massive play at some point in this game. He probably goes over 100 yards with a touchdown, most likely. Number 7, I got Puka Nacua versus Houston, and Puka could literally be the number 1 wide receiver on the year, but we all had minor hesitations because of the Stafford back injury. And the company line is that Stafford's back is fine, he's been practicing, and he should be good to go in week 1. But do I fully trust him? I'm not so sure. I'm kind of a bit worried about their offense to start the year. Their offensive line also didn't get a lot of reps together. Their left tackle only just returned to practice. So there are some moving parts in the Rams offense that I'm kind of not so sure about. But one thing is definitely sure, the target share for Puka will be elite. He's definitely the top target. So I trust Sean McVay. I trust Stafford as long as he starts the game. I have to trust Puka. Puka's top 10, no matter what. Number 8, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown at Green Bay. And before I rank St. Brown in the top 5, I just want to look at this new offense for Detroit with a new play caller. There's a chance he's still that elite volume wide receiver we remember, but there's also been some hype on a Jameson Williams breakout. Sam Laporta dealt with injuries last year, and maybe Goff does not look as good without Ben Johnson. So while I'm not worried about Isaac Tesla, the rookie, it does factor in, and I'm just not dying to put Amon-Ra in my top 5 rankings when I have not seen this offense with an entirely new offensive coordinator. So at number 8, I think he's definitely a lock in your lineup. No one's benching Amon-Ra, but I do have him as a lower end wide receiver 1 at number 8 in my rankings. I also want to mention that last season against the Packers, he was actually pretty touchdown dependent. Last year, he averaged 6.5 targets per game, 6 catches per game, only 50 yards per game, and scored 1 touchdown in those 2 matchups. That's only an average of 11 points per game in half PPR. So if he does not score a touchdown, there is kind of some capped upside. I'm not worried, but I just don't expect his best game of the season in week 1. I might be wrong, but last year he did start off slow. He only had 3 catches for 13 yards in week 1 of last season. Odds are, though, he plays pretty well. I'm not benching Amon-Ra St. Brown. And here, I think, is the cutoff point for the elite of the elite this week. At number 9, I do think CeeDee Lamb does drop down a peg. I know you drafted CeeDee probably 3rd overall, if not at worst top 5, and you're definitely not benching him. Of course, he's in your lineup. But I will acknowledge that last year, his only game versus Philadelphia was a big letdown. Week 10 versus the Eagles, Lamb had 10 targets, 6 catches, 24 total yards, and did not score a touchdown. That's only 5.4 points against Philadelphia. And Vic Fangio's defense is one of the best in the league. I think they're going to be firing on all cylinders. I'm worried about some of these corners that will be lining up on the opposite side of CeeDee Lamb. But last year, his game against the Eagles was with Cooper Rush. Dak is back, and you know the volume's going to be there. I'm pumping the brakes. I don't expect CeeDee Lamb's best game of the season against Philadelphia, but I do have him in the lower end of the top 10. At number 9, I did downgrade him kind of significantly. At number 10, I'm also downgrading Justin Jefferson, but just like CeeDee, he's locked in the top 10. You cannot bench him, and he is still questionable with that hamstring injury, but he's returned to practice. I think he will be good to go. But if you do look closely at Jefferson's track record against Chicago, while he lights them up at home, he's actually nowhere near the same player on the road. The last 3 seasons for Jefferson at Chicago, he's averaging 6.7 targets per game. That's pretty low for Jefferson's average. Only 3.3 catches per game, so that's less than a 50% catch percentage, for 37 yards per game and only 1 touchdown in those 3 matchups. So that's an average of 7.4 points per game when he plays in Chicago against the Bears. And they do have some good corners. Jalen Johnson is one of the best corners in the NFL. He can definitely lock you up. And historically, he has limited Jefferson whenever the game is in Chicago. So I'm not expecting Jefferson's best game of the year. To pretend like I have full confidence in J.J. McCarthy making his rookie debut on Monday Night Primetime on the road, I would be lying to you if I said there is no red flags to speak of. So that is my concern with Jefferson. I would like to know exactly what J.J. McCarthy looks like before I rank Jeddah's as the wide receiver one, especially on the road at Chicago. I think it is a legit downgrade. So at number 10, you're not going to bench him, but don't expect his best game of the season. Historically, he does struggle on the road versus the Bears. At number 11, I have T. Higgins at Cleveland, and he's another must start based on where you drafted him. You cannot bench him. His main red flag is that he's prone to leg injuries, specifically of the hamstring variety. But week 1, he's fully healthy. He's good to go. And the Browns defense doesn't scare you. I have no hesitations. Last year, he scored a touchdown in both of those Cleveland games. So fire him up. T. Higgins, a must start week in, week out. At number 12, I am starting JSN versus the Niners with confidence. There is some slight unknown variables when it comes to Sam Darnold's debut with the Seahawks, but they did get rid of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and JSN is locked into the number 1 role in this offense. So he's going to dominate. Last year in 2 games when DK Metcalf was off the field, JSN did average 21.7 points per game. So there is truly elite upside for JSN this season. I think we might be drafting him in the first round potentially this time next year. But for week 1, we kind of need to wait and see, but I trust the volume to be there. I think he's locked into heavy volume week in, week out. And last year in 2 games versus San Francisco, he was also very efficient. He averaged 10 targets per game, 7.5 catches per game for 82 yards per game, but he did not score a touchdown. However, still averaged 11.9 points per game. So if you have a 12-point floor incoming from JSN, even without the touchdown, he is a bust-proof candidate this week. I'm definitely locking him into my lineup. I don't think you can bench Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So I have no hesitations here. Trust JSN. He's got to be in your lineup. At 13 and 14, I have both of the Bucks wide receivers, Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka, on the road at Atlanta. And the main selling point for why the Bucks receivers are going to be lights out this year is because to start the season, there is very little target competition. Chris Godwin is unavailable for at least like 6 games pretty much. And then Jalen McMillan, who might factor in for some touchdown production, is also on IR for half the year. Cade Otton also dealing with some injuries. So the targets are locked in for Evans and Egbuka. Even Rachaad White is not 100%. So I know for a fact there's at least 9-10 targets going to both of them. And I do believe that Evans will find pay dirt. He has 5 touchdowns in his last 6 games versus the Falcons, and touchdowns are always his calling card. You know Evans has elite upside any given week. But Egbuka, just like Evans, is going to dominate early in the year while Godwin gets healthy. And even when Godwin comes back, I'm not convinced that Egbuka will be losing much value. It is definitely possible that he remains the wide receiver 1 all year. It's probably not the safest bet in week 1 in his rookie debut, but if he overtakes the 32-year-old Mike Evans at any point this year, I don't think he's going to look back. I think Egbuka is going to crush this season. I am very committed to him in the subscriber league, and I think he's going off in week 1 at the Falcons. So this game could be a shootout. I did pick the Falcons to win, but the Bucks are always live to beat anyone. This game could be very high scoring in the Falcons Stadium. So light up both of them. I think Mike Evans and Egbuka are must starts in your lineup. At number 15, I have Xavier Worthy at the Chargers, and a major selling point of drafting Worthy this year was the Rashee Rice suspension. So for 6 weeks, we do not have Rashee to compete with him. We know Worthy will have a very big role in this offense, and the fact that this game is in Brazil, while it is a major variable, I think if it hurts anyone, it would be the veteran Travis Kelce, not the year 2 speedster Xavier Worthy. So I would anticipate a low-scoring game from both teams, but I still expect a high target share for Worthy, and inevitably they will press their luck, target him deep down the field. He can score from anywhere, even in the run game. So I definitely trust the ceiling for Worthy. If he puts up a 25-point game in this matchup, no one would be shocked. So although the Chargers defense is legit, I'm not going to panic. Worthy is a must start in my opinion, but I will acknowledge last year in 2 games versus LA, he maybe wasn't elite. He only averaged 5 targets per game, 4 catches per game, 59 yards per game, and only scored 1 touchdown. That's an average of 10.9 half PPR points per game. So that's fine. It's a decent floor, but it is a little touchdown dependent, and it does not crack open that elite ceiling we're hoping for with Worthy. So the Brazil situation, a big gamble, but in general, the targets are locked in for Worthy. I would trust him as a top 20 play in this spot. But at number 16, on the opposite side of the ball in this matchup, I do have Lad McConkey of the Chargers going up against Kansas City. Trent McDuffie is not a good matchup. The Chiefs are very good at locking up opposing wide receivers. Their defense is elite. So I'm not expecting Ladidi's best game of the season. However, last year, while he did miss one of those games with an injury, in week 4 when he faced off against Kansas City, he had 7 targets, 5 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown. That was 15.2 points in half PPR. So while there is a chance that Keenan Allen does hog up a lot of the red zone targets, I'm not going to panic. He's not going to overshadow Ladidi at all. McConkey is clearly the number 1 wide receiver for Justin Herbert this season. So similar to Xavier Worthy, I'm trusting the target share. Even if it's a low scoring game, I know the volume is headed for him, and I will trust the floor. It's a very bust-proof proposition to be starting Lad this season. So fire him up. He's going to be fine. Definitely don't hit the panic button just because they're playing in Brazil against a good defense. Next up at 17, I do have DeVonta Smith of the Eagles going up against the Cowboys, and I think Philadelphia is going to blow out Dallas on Thursday. I believe the Eagles will absolutely torch them, so betting on the playmakers in their offense feels like a no-brainer this week. I do not want to bench them in their home opener after they drop the banner. This is a division rivalry, and they are going to demolish them, embarrass the Cowboys as best they can. So last year, they won 34-6, 41-7. It might be the same situation, and even if the target share isn't that high in the second half, I expect Davante to get in on the scoring frenzy early on in this game. If we look at the last 6 games versus Dallas, he has been very consistent in the touchdown department. He averages only 6.7 targets, 4.8 catches per game for 69 yards per game, but in those 6 games has 6 total touchdowns. He almost always finds the end zone against Dallas. So an average of 15.3 points is very encouraging. I really trust the floor for Davante. I expect him to score a touchdown. So I want him in my lineup. He's a clear top 20 play this week against the Cowboys. At number 18, I have another wide receiver 2 in a high-scoring offense. Davante Adams versus Houston, I think, is a lock in your lineup pretty much every single week. The Texans have a very good defense, but I imagine that they prioritize Puka Nacua a little bit more. So Adams should get open pretty consistently all year long, and I love his touchdown upside this year, assuming Stafford stays healthy. But Stafford's good to go. He'll be fine week 1, so I'm going to trust that that happens. I think Adams will score a touchdown in his first game with the Rams. So I believe he's a lock in your lineup, a clear top 20 play. And last year he did play against the Texans alongside Garrett Wilson for the Jets and had a very good game. Week 9 versus Houston, Adams had 11 targets, 7 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown. 18.6 points was definitely a nice score from Adams in that one. So I'm really excited to see what he can do with Stafford and McVay. Fire him up with confidence. Love Davante Adams this season. At number 19, I have Jameson Williams at the Packers, and the new offensive coordinator in Detroit has been hyping up a breakout season loading for JMO all preseason. So last year's breakout was impressive. If he's going to break out again, we may get 1,200 yards on the year from Jameson Williams. So there's a chance we see an elite ceiling from him this season. There's a chance he actually overtakes Amon-Ra. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think the floor for him is going to be top 20, just like it was last year. And I do not fear the Packers secondary very much. They moved off of Jair Alexander, and I think they'll focus a bit more on Amon-Ra in week 1. Last year in week 14 versus Green Bay, JMO scored 10.5 points without a touchdown. 8 targets, 5 catches, and 80 yards was his stat line. The other game he was suspended for, so there's not that many good matchups against the Packers to look at. But I think he's going to be fine. I think he was one of the best ADP values in the draft this year. I'd start him with confidence. I ranked him top 20, and week 1, I have him top 20 once again. Number 20, though, is Tetairoa McMillan at Jacksonville. The rookie is questionable with a hamstring injury, but he did return to practice on Tuesday, and the reports said it was always just a minor concern. I don't think they would have traded away Adam Thielen if they were actually worried about Tet's hamstring injury. So I'm going to give him a full green light in week 1 against a very porous Jags secondary. I have no concerns. While the Travis Hunter variable is definitely a potential red flag, all the reports say Hunter is locked into the offensive side of the ball and is just a backup corner, not going to play very much on defense to start the season. So his main job is as a wide receiver. Even if he was lining up against Tet, I think Tet can burn him. Tet's a really tough matchup, and I think he's locked into a high target share in week 1, especially because Jalen Coker was placed on IR. So other than Xavier Legette, who else is getting targets from Bryce Young? McMillan might see 12 plus targets in his debut. The Jags are not going to be able to stop him. So I think he's a phenomenal play in week 1. I fully trust him. And last year in his college week 1 season opener for Arizona, he did put up 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. While I'm not expecting that, of course, it does speak to how dominant he can be when he goes up against a bad defense. So I am very excited. Love Tet McMillan this week. I think he's a locked-in top 20 option against the Jags with no target competition in Carolina. Fire up Tet with confidence. At number 21, I think we are dropping down a tier, and this is more of a flex level value overall. But if you drafted Tyreek Hill in the 3rd round, I think you have to start him. But I'm not going to lie, Tyreek does scare the shit out of me this season. But I do believe he will get traded, and before the deadline, I do think they're going to try and showcase him to make him look pretty good for anybody who's interested in acquiring him. But to pretend like I'm not worried about Tyreek Hill would be a lie. I think at some point the Dolphins are going to look like a dumpster fire, and it may start instantly in the first quarter against the Colts. But I do think he'll be okay. He is dealing with an oblique injury, but has returned to practice. I'm not worried about him losing some speed and looking bad with an injury designation. But he is questionable. It is worth mentioning. I don't think you're going to bench him based on where you drafted him, but to pretend like I'm fully confident would be inaccurate. I do have some major red flag concerns on Tyreek Hill. But week 1, I will start him. I'm not going to be too pessimistic. I think he'll be okay against the Colts. This matchup could turn into a shootout, and I think at the end of the day, he's their best weapon. But there are some reports that Waddle might be the number 1 receiver in Miami this year. It's possible, but in week 1, I don't want to bet on that. I believe Tyreek will have a fine output in week 1, but it may fall off a cliff quickly. I'm still pretty concerned about his runway with the Dolphins. Next up at 22, I do have Terry McLaurin versus the Giants. And Terry signed his contract. There's no reason to be worried about his snap share. The ankle injury appears to be past him. But I will mention this matchup has given him some problems in the past. Last year in 2 games versus the Giants with Jaden Daniels as his quarterback, Terry only averaged 5.5 targets per game, only 4 catches per game for just 21 yards per game, and did score 2 touchdowns. He was very touchdown dependent in those matchups. An average of 10.1 points per game is nothing special. And if that happens again, then Terry is not a high upside play this week. Both of those touchdowns also happened in the same game. So week 9 on the road at the Giants last season, he scored those 2 touchdowns, put up 14.9 points. But in week 2, he put up a big stinker at home versus the Giants with just 5.2 points. So that's a reason to be worried, but we drafted Terry pretty high for a reason. I think the floor is going to be there. I don't think I would bench him, but I'm not expecting his highest game of the season. There is a chance he does not look elite against the Giants. Once again, they did hold him in check both times last season. So good luck with Terry. I think you might need it. He's just a high-end flex option this week, but odds are you're not benching him. You drafted him pretty high for a reason. At number 23, I have Garrett Wilson versus Pittsburgh, and in 2 career games versus the Steelers, Garrett Wilson has never scored a touchdown. He averages just 51 yards per game and just 7.4 half PPR points per game. So there's a chance that continues. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets held out of the end zone very often this year. The Jets are not going to provide many passing touchdowns this season with Justin Fields. So I'm a bit worried about Garrett Wilson in general, but the volume is going to probably keep the floor pretty high all year. You kind of knew what you were getting when you drafted Garrett Wilson. The volume keeps him eligible for your lineup every single week, but without a touchdown, he probably does not crack the top 15 ever. So going up against Joey Porter Jr. is kind of a downgrade. I'm not dying to be chasing that matchup. Hopefully he can line up against Darius Slay a few times, and hopefully the youth and the speed will help him create some separation in that matchup. But I don't know exactly what Justin Fields is going to offer, but inevitably he probably locks onto Garrett Wilson, and it covers up any of the bumps in the road for Garrett Wilson. I think he'll be okay. There's a chance he gets 15 targets this week, but to expect an elite performance and a guaranteed touchdown against Pittsburgh, I think is unwise. I have a feeling this is a pretty low-scoring game between the Jets and the Steelers. Both teams kind of lean on defense. So not my favorite start of the week, but definitely in flex consideration. I probably am going to start Garrett Wilson, but he's not a top 20 play, in my opinion. At 24, I have Courtland Sutton versus the Titans, and last year the Tennessee defense was extremely banged up, especially in the secondary, but week 1 they are a lot healthier, and L'Jarius Sneed is actually questionable with a quad injury, but the head coach for Tennessee says he's trending towards playing, and in this matchup, that is a relevant downgrade for Courtland Sutton. If we go back 2 years when Sneed played for the Chiefs, Courtland Sutton had 2 games against him and was very touchdown dependent in those matchups. He scored in both of those games, that was with Russell Wilson, but was held to just 4.5 targets per game, only 3 catches per game, and 38 yards per game with 2 touchdowns against Kansas City. So 6 points is coming from a touchdown, and with it, he averaged 11.3 points per game. If you take away the touchdown, Sutton looked like shit against Sneed 2 years ago. So I'm a bit worried about this matchup. I would like to downgrade him, but I do think the Broncos offense is going to look really good in this one, and ultimately, I'm not that afraid of Sneed completely shutting him down. So while there is a minor red flag, I think based on where you drafted Sutton, odds are you're starting him, and I think from a floor standpoint, he will be fine. He's scored a lot of touchdowns the last 2 seasons, and Bo Nix usually trusts him in the red zone. I think the touchdown will hit once again. So Sutton at number 24, probably not his best game of the year against Sneed, but still usable in fantasy. I do think he's a solid flex play this week. At number 25, I have George Pickens at the Eagles, and we don't know exactly how Pickens is going to be used in the new Brian Schottenheimer offense in Dallas, but what I am expecting is the Eagles to dominate and for there to be a lot of garbage time in this matchup. So if they lock up CeeDee Lamb like they did last year, then Pickens is going to be desperately needed. He will probably get a lot of targets from Dak as they go hurry up in catch-up mode. So I could see like 11 plus targets for Pickens here. I think odds are he scores a touchdown. And I did downgrade CeeDee Lamb. The benefactor would be George Pickens. I think he's a very good flex play this week against the Eagles. But the Eagles are very deep in the secondary. Vic Fangio's defense can definitely lock them up. They failed to score 10 points in both games against Philly last year, but that was with a backup quarterback. So I think Pickens will be okay. I think he'll find pay dirt. I think he finds the end zone. I think he's a good start in week 1, but the Eagles matchup is a little scary. At number 26, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. at New Orleans, and I'm definitely not a Harrison truther. I've been fading him all off season, and while I don't think he'll be much better than his rookie season, he always does have high upside, especially when he scores a touchdown. He is kind of touchdown dependent, but I do think the Cardinals will likely crush New Orleans, and I do see a lot of upside in this matchup. There's always going to be some decent volume. Other than Trey McBride, there's no target competition whatsoever in Arizona, other than, I guess, James Conner. So I'm going to start the year on a more optimistic note with Harrison Jr. I think he scores a touchdown, and I do believe the ceiling will be available this week. Against the Saints, I think the Cardinals look pretty good. I think Harrison's a decent flex option in this game, but without a touchdown, he always has the potential to burn you. Good luck. I think it works out this week. At 27, I think DJ Moore versus the Vikings has a solid floor. Last year, in 2 games versus the Vikings, he averaged 14.3 points per game, and he also caught all 15 of his targets with a touchdown. So I think he's a decent play. I think as the year goes on, some of the young pass catchers for Chicago will start to emerge. However, in the beginning of the season, I expect Caleb to kind of lean on the veteran. I do think the floor is definitely safer for DJ Moore to start the year. So against the Vikings, there's still a lot of variables, a lot of unknown factors with the Bears offense, but I do think they'll be somewhat viable. I do think DJ Moore will put up a good game here. So I think the floor is going to be there. I think the volume will be fine, and odds are he gives you like at least 7 catches for 80 yards. I think they'll lean on the checkdowns. I think the yards after catch will be there. DJ Moore, I think, has a very safe floor in this game, but I'm worried that the touchdowns don't hit, and as the season goes on, his target share does diminish. But week 1, I think he's the safest bet in Chicago. I think he is a top 30 receiver in this matchup. I'm going to start him, but he's just a flex play in week 1. At 28, I have Travis Hunter versus the Panthers, and no one knows for sure what Hunter's going to look like, but his primary role is clearly on offense, and behind Brian Thomas Jr., there's really no reliable pass catcher at all to speak of. So Hunter, I think, is locked into a lot of volume in the Liam Cohen offense. He's going to be operating in the Chris Godwin role, so should have a lot of checkdowns. I think the screen game will pay some good dividends for Travis Hunter's stock this year. So I think he's going to be good. I think in week 1, they want this fan base excited about their number 2 overall pick. I would not be surprised at all to see a Travis Hunter touchdown celebration on the highlight reel for this game. So I think he's going to have a high ceiling. I think he will find the end zone. I like Travis Hunter's upside in this Panthers matchup. The Panthers definitely don't scare you. They're going to have their hands full with Brian Thomas Jr. Hunter should get open pretty early and often, not just this week, but all season long. I think he's a top 30 play all year. At 29, I think the last really confident option I would have in my lineup is Matthew Golden versus Detroit, and I'd be trying to start him anywhere I can. If I drafted Golden, I think you have this year's Lad McConkey on your team. The Lions defense was elite at stopping the run last year, but their secondary was a top 4 matchup for opposing wide receivers, and the loss of Aaron Glenn as defensive coordinator might not be the biggest deal, but it is relevant, and there's a chance that this secondary did not improve at all. There's a chance it got worse heading in to week 1. So this is not a bad matchup at all. I don't think all of a sudden they're going to be some lockdown defense in the secondary. They probably focus a lot on Golden, but Jordan Love is good to go. All the reports are that overwhelmingly Golden has been the number 1 target in training camp. I think his rookie debut is going to look phenomenal. They drafted him first round. They want this pick to be a success. So love Matthew Golden, not just this week, but all year long. As a top 30 play, I'd be trying to get him in the lineup in the flex if I can. At number 30, I do think we're dropping down a tier, and I do think risk factors in a lot more. Odds are you're going to be trying to bench these players based on where you drafted them. But I do see a lot of upside for a guy like Jerry Jeudy because the matchup against Cincinnati is phenomenal. The Bengals defense is atrocious. So there's no concern here at all. It's definitely a plus matchup. While we are worried about the Browns quarterback room, week 1, Joe Flacco's good to go, and Flacco has no weight on his shoulders. He literally has nothing to lose, and at this stage of his career, he's just going to sling it downfield as much as possible. So I could see a lot of upside for the Browns pass catchers here. While I think Njoku might be the main benefactor, I do think Jeudy will operate as the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. So I think the floor is pretty decent, and I also see some high touchdown potential. Trusting this matchup is something I'm going to do all season until the Bengals can prove they can actually stop someone. So I'm not worried at all. I think Jeudy gets a big upgrade, and I think he offers a very good sell high window if he looks fantastic in this game. I'm not a believer in him long term, especially when they change quarterbacks. I think he has no floor whatsoever, but week 1 versus the Bengals is a great matchup. I think he is a top 30 play at the position in week 1, but there is some risk. The Browns are never the safest bet. At 31, I got Jaylen Waddle of the Dolphins at the Colts, and Waddle was terrible last year. I don't fully know what his role is going to be alongside Tyreek Hill this year, but there are rumors that he is the locked-in number 1 wide receiver in this offense this season. So until I see it, I'm not going to fully believe that, but it is definitely possible. And I definitely see him having massive upside once they do trade Tyreek Hill. I would expect that to happen before the deadline. But week 1, he has to compete with Tyreek. I think he'll be the number 2 target. And against the Colts defense, it's not a nightmare matchup, but I'm not fully convinced that the Dolphins are going to play well at all this year. So he was not even top 50 in points per game last season. I would like to wait and see just a little bit for Waddle, but the matchup's not bad, and I think the upside is definitely there. The volume could crush, and I do see some high-end potential for Waddle in a potential shootout. Neither team has a very elite defense. So Waddle's pretty interesting, but at 31, odds are he may not fit into your lineup. If you have 2 flex spots, I would like to start him. If you only have 1, you may not have the space. But at 32, another wide receiver 2 I'm pretty confident in this season would be Deebo Samuel. And the Giants defense looks pretty good this year, but mainly in the pass rush. So I do think Deebo will be heavily involved. They did lock up Terry McLaurin in this matchup last year, so there is a chance that they rely on Deebo quite a bit here. And especially after the Brian Robinson Jr. trade, I could see a very consistent role for Deebo in the run game in the red zone near the goal line. So I think he'll probably score a touchdown. I think Deebo has some high upside, but mainly the floor is what I'm interested in. I think Deebo's a pretty safe start, not just this week, but every week moving forward. I don't think the Commanders traded for him without a big plan to use him. So he's still only 29. I think last year the downside was mainly linked to the pneumonia, and I do think he'll be a safe start most weeks. He's a decent flex play versus the Giants. At 33, I have Zay Flowers at Buffalo, and this is projected to be one of the highest point totals on the weekend, and I would like every piece of this Ravens-Bills game that I can get. But both offenses are kind of crowded. They do spread the ball around, but the Isaiah Likely foot injury does factor in, and Flowers is clearly their most dynamic pass catcher on the field. So while he was injured and unavailable in their playoff loss to the Bills last January, I would assume he wants to make up for that absence and showcase his skill set. But I will acknowledge, when he has a bad game, there is no floor to speak of. He can absolutely burn you with close to a bagel. And last year, although the Ravens did beat the Bills 35-10 in their matchup week 4 last season, Flowers was a no-show. He had literally the worst game of the season against Buffalo last year. He finished with only 2 targets, 1 reception, and 10 yards. No touchdown means 1.5 point in half PPR. But if they beat him 35-10, then they just didn't really need him. Perhaps this game is more competitive. In Buffalo, I would expect the Bills to play a lot better than just 10 points on the scoreboard. So I think it'll be a back and forth shootout. I do expect Flowers to be a lot more involved than just 2 targets. I think he's a very high upside swing, but anytime you trust him, there's always the potential he puts up a dud. So good luck. I do think the ceiling is elite, but if he does put up less than 5 points, don't be surprised. There's always boom-bust variance when you trust Zay Flowers. But this week, I do think the ceiling is absolutely open to him. If he crushes with over 20 points, it'd be kind of a bummer to bench him. At 34, another high-variance boom-bust option would be Ricky Pearsall. Last year, he had a lot of games with less than 40 yards and very few fantasy points, but if he ever went over 40 yards, he was scoring a touchdown and averaged 18 fantasy points in his high-end matchups. So Ricky Pearsall, also a very boom-bust option. And although Jauan Jennings did return to practice this Monday, he's been dealing with a calf injury, missed a lot of practice time. I do think Pearsall's locked in to the number 1 role at wide receiver. So with Ayuk on the PUP list, Pearsall is a good bet for high target volume. However, one of the appeals for drafting him was the expected early season volume that would lead to high scoring games. So if that happens, I wouldn't be surprised. However, this matchup against Seattle is definitely a downgrade. Most of the game, he's going to be lining up against Reek Woolen or Devon Witherspoon, and those are legit downgrades. The Seahawks secondary is legit. So I don't like anyone really going up against Seattle anytime this year. So even though I'm very optimistic about Pearsall, I think this is a matchup you would rather avoid. And the downgrade is why I do not rank him in the top 30. There's definitely a chance that he explodes. He could finish with a top 20 performance this week. But just like Zay Flowers, I do think the floor is kind of non-existent. I would like to see him on the field at least once in a tough matchup before I consider him a must start, regardless of who he's lining up against. The Seahawks matchup is definitely a downgrade. So I might pump the brakes. I might bench him if I have the luxury to do that. But maybe you don't have the depth. Maybe you're kind of forced into it. I don't think it'll be his best game of the year. But given the lack of target competition, other than Kittle and McCaffrey, there's definitely some upside where Pearsall does crush. So good luck. But this week, I don't think he's a top 30 play. More of a low-end, risky flex option, in my opinion. At 35, I have DK Metcalf at the Jets. And while I trust Metcalf to see a large target share in the Steelers offense, I'm not totally convinced that Rodgers is going to have elite chemistry with him in week 1. So there's a revenge game narrative for Rodgers, but the Jets are also seeking revenge against Rodgers himself. And DK has never been a matchup-proof receiver. Against some of the best corners, he has often gotten locked up, most notably against guys like Jalen Ramsey in the past. So Sauce Gardner is typically a matchup you'd like to avoid. And last year when Metcalf played for the Seahawks, he did play against the Jets in week 13. He was nothing special. He scored 8.6 points on 9 targets, only 4 catches for 66 yards. While he can catch a very deep touchdown, if he does not score a touchdown, you are not getting very much of a ceiling from Metcalf. So just a low-end flex option. I think the floor is safe on DK, but this week I'd like to bench him if I can. At 36, I also think I would like to bench Jakobi Meyers if I can. The trade request is definitely not a good sign, but Las Vegas has no interest in granting that trade request, and Meyers is just locked into playing for the Raiders. He's under contract, and he will suit up in week 1. He's healthy. He's good to go. He has no choice but to play. But he is getting a revenge game here against his former team, the Patriots, on the road. I think there may be some hiccups for Geno in his Raiders debut, but I do think this offense could be very high scoring. Chip Kelly is going to run a lot of plays, most likely. So I do think Meyers is locked into the number 2 target for Geno this year. He's definitely behind Brock Bowers. However, the addition of Amari Cooper is a variable I would like to see play out before I fully endorse Meyers every single week. So while he's in the top 40, he's not in the top 30. I think he's a low-end flex play. Just like Metcalf, you probably get about 8.5 points pretty safely, but to go over 12, not a safe bet. I'm not convinced he scores a touchdown in this matchup. Christian Gonzalez is a legit downgrade as well as the cornerback lining up opposite him. So good luck with Meyers, but based on where you drafted him, perhaps you have to start him. There's a chance you don't have much depth at the position. At 37, I think we are dropping down a significant tier, and at this point, I think you do want to be benching all of these players, but maybe you're locked into it based on draft capital. At 37, I got Rome Odunze versus the Vikings, and if you have blind faith in Chicago, then be my guest and start him. I would like to be going up against Rome this week because I do not trust the Bears to start off perfectly well. So if you like this matchup, it makes sense. The Vikings were pretty bad in the secondary last year, much better at stopping the run. However, Rome did not play well against the Vikings last year. In both matchups, he had exactly 39 yards, and that was definitely unusable in fantasy. So I'm not dying to trust him. I think this Caleb Williams connection could be very shaky to start the season. The reports are that Caleb was overwhelmed with some of Ben Johnson's system this offseason, and there's a chance they look really, really ugly in week 1. Brian Flores is a great defensive coordinator. I think Caleb will be confused many times in this game. So the looks are going to be disguised. I think he could struggle, and to guarantee that Odunze is going to be his top target week 1 is pretty naive. There's a lot of risk involved in a crowded offense. So the only Bears pass catcher I'm trusting in week 1 would be DJ Moore. While I do like Odunze's upside more long-term, I think he'll be the more valuable guy. In week 1, I would like to see it before I trust it. The ceiling is very high. However, the floor is pretty much non-existent. I will pass. The risk level on Rome Odunze is a little too high in week 1. At 38, I think the risk level on Calvin Ridley is also off the charts. Ridley is questionable. He's labeled with some vague soreness, but he is on track to play in week 1. He has returned to practice, and the head coach has confidence he'll be available. But I'm a big believer in Cam Ward. On the season, I think Ridley will be very valuable, but in week 1 against the Broncos, fuck no. I have no desire to be chasing Patrick Surtain in this matchup. So I think Cam Ward could have a very rough rookie debut here. While I'm not going to completely panic, I just don't want to be chasing a nightmare matchup like this. Surtain's the best corner in the NFL, and odds are he really locks up Ridley, the clear number 1 target for the Titans. So I'm not going to start him. If you have to, just based on your lack of depth, then good fucking luck. This is going to be a rough matchup. And if Ridley puts up a bagel, I wouldn't be that surprised. But odds are he still gets a decent target share. Odds are he still catches like 4 for 50. That's usable, but it's definitely not good. I don't think Ridley is a good start at all this week. I would definitely like to bench him. At 39, I have Cooper Kupp versus the Niners, and I'm actually pretty optimistic that Kupp starts the season kind of strong, because Torrey Horton is good, but definitely not a threat as a rookie in week 1 to overtake Kupp. And the main concern with Kupp is that long-term, his body breaks down and he does not stay healthy. But in week 1, he's good to go. I think Darnold is an underrated quarterback, so I could see a high volume incoming for Cooper Kupp, but he's definitely behind JSN, but the Niners are obviously going to prioritize stopping JSN above him. So there's definitely some upside in the red zone. I could see Kupp easily score a touchdown, but without it, I think you will have a rough time going over 10 points. Until we see it, I don't want to fully trust the Darnold Seahawks offense. I think they're going to lean a little bit more on the run game. So wait and see mode with Cooper Kupp, but definitely has some upside. He's healthy and could find pay dirt pretty easily against San Francisco. I do like his upside, but a little risky in week 1. At number 40, I also think there's some risk factor with Stefon Diggs with his new team, the Patriots, and he is actually listed as questionable with a knee injury. But despite that tag, he's expected to play on Sunday, and the new Patriots offense is going to be fun to watch this year, but I think they lean on the run a bit more. I don't know exactly what the target share will look like in New England. So while I do think Diggs is the top target, I don't think he's locked into that role all season long. His chemistry with Drake May is not fully established. So coming off the ACL, while he did look good in training camp, I would like to see him in a real game before I lock him into my lineup. There is some high upside, but there's also a chance that the Patriots pass catchers still offer no consistency. Without that touchdown, I don't think he goes over 10 points. So I'm probably going to sit him. I don't feel super confident. I'd like to wait and see what Diggs looks like in New England before I trust him. At 41, I also think I'd like to wait and see on Keenan Allen versus the Chiefs. While I do think he's a good red zone target, very much involved on third down, he's an old player and it's a crowded target share, and he's definitely behind Lad McConkey. So maybe QJ and Trey Harris factor in as well, maybe even KLS factors in, but Keenan Allen could easily score multiple touchdowns any given week and could be a decent start. I would just like to see it. He's kind of old, and I don't expect him to be an elite option for Justin Herbert right out the gate. In Brazil, that game is probably low scoring. I think I'm going to pass on Keenan Allen in week 1. At 42, I think I'm also going to pass on Jauan Jennings at the Seahawks. The matchup is not a good one at all. Jauan did return to practice this week. He barely practiced in August, dealing with a calf injury and a contract dispute. So even if the calf injury was a bluff, just so they didn't have to practice, whenever we've seen some camp holdouts, they always have some rust early in the season. They always start off slow, and I just don't trust him to be elite right out the gate. So I think his lack of practice time is a red flag, and he probably starts off pretty slowly. I don't want to be trusting him against a very tough matchup on the road at Seattle. I'm only going to trust Pearsall of the two. So no thanks with Jauan Jennings. I would like to see him fully healthy before I endorse him. At 42, I think you are definitely benching these options. But 43, Michael Pittman Jr., I think is kind of tempting from a floor standpoint. The Dolphins secondary is terrible this season, and they did acquire Minkah Fitzpatrick, but the safety is not going to lock up the wide receiver in this matchup. So While Pittman is not the most appealing option, I think in week 1 he has some upside that maybe could convince you he's a good start. Josh Downs missed a lot of practice time with a hamstring injury, and even though he probably is available week 1, I do think Pittman really benefits with probably better chemistry with Daniel Jones. But there's also the Tyler Warren hype that's been going crazy as of late. I don't feel super confident in projecting a lot of volume for the Colts pass catchers. Trusting Daniel Jones to keep anyone relevant is pretty dicey. So no thank you with Pittman. I would like to see what Daniel Jones actually has to offer in this passing game before I start any of the receivers. I'm probably going to start Tyler Warren with confidence. Jonathan Taylor, I think, pops off. But Pittman, even with high volume, could still let you down. At 43, he's interesting, but not a safe start. I will bench Pittman this week. I'm also benching Chris Olave this week versus the Cardinals, and I'm not a full believer in Arizona this year, but if there's one rookie I think really moves the needle for them, it would be the cornerback Will Johnson, the rookie out of Michigan. So I think he's a potential shutdown corner right out the gate, and I would not want to bet against him. I do not trust Spencer Rattler whatsoever. So I want to see what the target share for Olave looks like in the Kellen Moore system. While I definitely trust the volume, I don't think it turns into touchdowns at all. I do not see any upside whatsoever with Rattler. So I've been fading Olave all summer. I've not been interested in drafting him. And week 1, I have no desire to trust him at all. I think he's a heavy fade against an underrated rookie cornerback. Will Johnson does scare me. So no thank you. I'm going to pass on Olave. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but until I am, I will tell you to bench him. Most weeks, he's not going to crack my top 40 receivers. Last year, he did not even rank top 50 in points per game, and that was with Derek Carr. Spencer Rattler is a major downgrade. At 45, I think we're dropping down a tier, and at this point, I'm definitely benching these guys. I don't think there's any safety net to trust, but you never know. They could score a deep touchdown or just offer a little bit more points than I'm predicting. I have both Buffalo receivers, Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman, back-to-back at 45 and 46. Shakir was a very safe floor play all season last year, but he was dealing with a preseason ankle injury. And while he did return to practice, he's still limited, and I don't fully trust his health going into week 1. Bills always spread the ball around, and betting on a touchdown with certainty is a major gamble in Buffalo. So until he's fully healthy, until he's off the injury report, I'm probably going to fade Shakir in my lineup. No thank you. The Ravens secondary is also a nightmare matchup. They really bolstered it in free agency in the draft this season. I have no desire to be testing it in week 1 with the Bills' shaky target share. No thank you on Khalil Shakir. But Keon Coleman is a sneaky breakout candidate this year, and especially with the Shakir injury, his chemistry with Josh Allen might look pretty good in week 1. So there is some upside here. Coleman is a boom bust option. He's more of a deep threat. That's what he was used as last season. And against the Ravens, it's going to be a high scoring game. There's always some massive upside, but there is no floor whatsoever. So if you want to bet on the high ceiling, be my guest. But if I'm going up against Keon this week, I like my chances. The odds that he busts against the Ravens are also pretty high. So I'd rather play it more conservative. I think I would keep both Buffalo wide receivers on the bench in week 1. At 47, I'm also going to keep the rookie Texans wide receiver Jayden Higgins on the bench as well. While I love his potential, I trust in his production this year. I would like to see it before I endorse it. I think he could be a very valuable asset. The number 2 receiver for CJ Stroud has always been productive, and although he was drafted 34th overall, got a fully guaranteed contract, I think in week 1 it'd be a little naive to pretend like he's a lock in your lineup and will crush immediately. So while I do love this guy's potential, he's one of my must draft sleepers this year. He's one of my guys. He's my ride or die basically at the position. My most drafted player on Underdog this summer was Jayden Higgins. In week 1, I think I'm going to pass. I think I'm going to bench him. At 48, I think I'm also going to bench Adam Thielen at Chicago, but I do see some sneaky upside, some decent value for Thielen here. Jefferson consistently gets shut down by the Bears when he plays on the road in Chicago, and with Addison suspended, they definitely traded for Thielen for a reason. So I think he has a decent target share in this one. I think JJ McCarthy has to rely on TJ Hawkinson and Adam Thielen a lot in this one, but the rookie is a true wild card at quarterback, and Thielen only just joined the team. It's not like he developed a ton of chemistry in practice with McCarthy, but he's a savvy veteran. He's played in the Kevin O'Connell system before. He knows exactly what to do, and I do think he'll be a fine floor play, especially in full PPR leagues. I think his floor is pretty high, but not going to trust the touchdown as a guarantee. I do not trust JJ McCarthy at the end of the day, so that's why in probably a low-scoring game, I will be fading Thielen. Not going to trust him right out the gate. At 49, though, I do think Cedric Tillman offers some appealing upside. I'm not convinced that there's a major drop-off between him and Jeudy in the Browns offense, but last year, other than 4 games, he was a complete afterthought until Amari Cooper got traded, and then he also dealt with a concussion, missed like 5 games to close the year. There's still a lot of risk with Cedric Tillman, but I love this matchup against Cincinnati, and right now he's the clear number 2 receiver. While there is hype for Isaiah Bond and Harold Fannin, I do still trust Tillman to be running a lot of routes in week 1. So maybe Flacco is not fully enamored with Njoku anymore. Maybe Jeudy is not his top target. There's a chance that Tillman fucking crushes, but to actually trust him in your lineup would be pretty risky. So not going to do it, but there is some upside here in DFS. I actually think he's kind of appealing. Not going to start him though in season long. I also think Xavier Leggett is very appealing in DFS. Leggett gets a great matchup against the Jaguars, and especially with Coker on IR, Thielen being traded to Minnesota, not every target can go to Tetairoa McMillan. So if you told me Leggett has one of those horseback riding touchdown celebrations against the Jaguars, wouldn't shock me at all. I do see some high upside for Leggett, but based on draft capital, I doubt you need him in the lineup. You probably have a lot of depth, and he's probably riding the bench on the majority of lineups. So gonna stay risk averse here with Leggett, but the upside's definitely there. It's kind of tempting, but only in DFS would I consider it. And then the last player I think has some like really appealing upside if you just want to swing for the fence would be Rashad Bateman at the Bills, my wide receiver 51 this week. The Ravens-Bills game is going to be a shootout, very high scoring game, and Bateman can always score one of those deep touchdowns and score like 13 points on just one play. So maybe it hits, but if it doesn't, you probably get burned. There's a chance you have the 1-point floor that we also see from Zay Flowers. The Ravens passing game is pretty random from week to week, so not going to bet on it, but this Bills-Ravens game is very tempting. I understand the appeal of Bateman, but the floor is pretty non-existent. No thank you in my lineup. Moving forward, though, it's very boom-bust with all these guys. I will run through the top 60, but mainly just to mention it. I have Rashid Shaheed at 52 versus the Cardinals. Shaheed's a big boom-bust option. He's basically the new Gabe Davis. You're either getting a deep touchdown or a bagel, and both scenarios, whether it's 20 points or 0, are both going to come on only like 3 to 5 targets in this Saints passing game. I have no desire to trust Spencer Rattler until I know he can provide some consistent floor for all the options in New Orleans. So Shaheed, too risky to bet on, no thank you. And then Marvin Mims in Denver, dealing with a groin injury, I think is also too boom bust to bet on as well. But if he connects on a deep play, just like Shaheed, he can drop 12 points on one play. There's always upside with Mims, but not a safe enough role in this offense for you to trust him. Sometimes he barely runs more than half the routes in any given game. I'm going to pass on Mims, but not a bad bench stash if you can get him off the wire. At 54, I have Jayden Reed versus Detroit, and he is questionable dealing with that foot injury all offseason. Reports say he's going to play through pain, but I have no desire to trust him. I think he might be more of a decoy in this matchup. So no thanks. While the ceiling is elite, just like Shaheed and Mims, the floor is non-existent. I'm going to pass. If it's not Jacobs, Golden, or Kraft, for the Packers, I have no desire to trust anyone else. No thank you on Jayden Reed. But another player that's injured entering week 1 that does have some value would be Josh Downs. I definitely want to roster Downs, but coming off the hamstring injury, he has yet to practice in full. And while I do like the Dolphins matchup a lot, I just don't trust Daniel Jones to keep multiple targets viable in fantasy. So if I'm going to start one Colts receiver this week, it would be Michael Pittman. I think Downs is just a bench stash in week 1. At 56, I also think Darnell Mooney is just a bench stash as well. He's questionable with his shoulder injury, but has returned to practice. His availability for week 1 is still up in the air, and there's a chance he does not play against the Bucks. But even if he does, I'm not going to bet on him. While I love his upside potential with Michael Penix this year, I don't trust Kyle Pitts as the number 2 option. I would just like to see how healthy Mooney is before I start him. There's a chance if he's active, he's just a decoy and never gets an actual target, is just trying to keep some attention away from Drake London. So not a safe bet at all, but a very good bench stash. Does have very high upside as the weeks go by, as he starts to get healthy in the Falcons offense with Michael Penix. He should be the number 2 target once healthy. At 57, I got Romeo Doubs versus Detroit, and Jayden Reed will reportedly play through that pain, but Doubs could really benefit, especially if Jayden Reed is just a decoy. Maybe there's a touchdown incoming for Romeo Doubs, but to trust him is a pretty big gamble. I'm not going to do that. The Lions matchup is not scary, but Romeo has always been touchdown dependent, and if it's not Matthew Golden, I'm not trying to start any other Packers receiver in my lineup until we see what the target share actually looks like behind Golden as the number 1 guy. So no thank you with Romeo Doubs, but kind of tempting. And then 58, I have Luther Burden, the rookie for the Bears versus the Vikings. I'm not going to trust him in week 1. The rookie has very high breakout potential, but until we see what this Caleb Williams, Ben Johnson offense looks like, I'm not going to trust him. I think he could be pretty shaky to start the year, but will come on strong as the season goes on. I think in October, we could see some very high output from Luther Burden on occasion. So get him on the roster if he's still available on the waiver wire. Pick him up. He's a very valuable asset, but to trust him week 1, too much of a gamble, in my opinion. At 59, I also think Joshua Palmer has some very high upside in a potential shootout versus the Ravens, especially with Shakir banged up. It's kind of tempting, but at best, Palmer's going to have a Mac Hollins type of season. Without a deep touchdown, I don't think he offers any value whatsoever, and that's why he's only interesting in DFS. I'm not going to start him against the Ravens week 1. And then last player I did rank is Demario Douglas of the Patriots versus the Raiders. It's not a bad matchup. Their secondary is pretty trash, but I only think Demario is an interesting floor play in full PPR leagues. He rarely scores touchdowns. His floor is kind of consistent, but if he offers you more than 7.5 points, I'd be kind of surprised. He's more of like a consistent bet just for like not a bagel, but in terms of upside, there's pretty much no chance he goes over 10 points most weeks. So no thank you. He's an interesting waiver claim perhaps heading into week 2, but I would not expect he's a good play at all in week 1. No thank you at all with Demario. So these are my wide receiver rankings this week. I feel extremely confident in the top 8. You obviously have to start him. You drafted him in the 1st and 2nd round. But I actually think CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson do deserve a downgrade. They are not in my elite tier. I cannot imagine they go over 20 fantasy points in their respective matchups. The Eagles are tough, and the Bears always lock down Jettas in Chicago. But you're still starting them no matter what. I think everyone in the top 20 is locked into your lineup. And then my favorite flex plays are the wide receivers 21 through 29. I think if you have them, you're trying to get them in the lineup. Hopefully you have the space, but if you have a very good running back that you can insert instead, I might trust the running back points. The floor is probably a bit safer. So if you have one of those flex decisions, let me know in the comment section. I'm happy to let you know my opinion. But starting with Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver 30, I do think the risk kind of factors in. And I think once we pass Jakobi Meyers at wide receiver 37, Rome Odunze is my cutoff point. I have no desire to be starting those players, starting with Rome and everyone behind him in the rankings. I think the upside is there, but the floor is kind of non-existent. Whether it's a matchup or just the lack of trust based on week 1 in a new environment, I think I would be fading them. It's more of a wait and see mode with pretty much everyone behind Jakobi Meyers. So that's the cutoff point for start-sit consideration. Unless you're in a deeper format or just desperate based on your depth, I would be passing on those options. But once we pass Chris Olave, wide receivers 45 and beyond, I think are way too risky. Mostly just high upside swings without a touchdown, you will most likely get burned. So no thanks after that point. I think starting with Shakir, everyone listed is definitely staying on the bench or the waiver wire if they're still available. So that's it for me in this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. My name's Adam Riancho. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.